1. About 2 years into my previous career, I had gotten tired of working customer service, cashiering, partly because you're constantly being watched and other departments hate on you because you don't know how tough my department is, you have it so easy up here. Physically, yes, mentally, emotionally, working all random shifts, dealing with Karens, knowing item codes, knowing and enforcing company policy, etc. Big no. So there's an opening in the produce department and I jump on it. Being based on seniority, I easily get the job. At first, things are pretty straightforward. I get trained to be the opener of the department. Other than having to be at work at 4 AM, stack bins of watermelons outside in 100+ degree Fahrenheit heat, and constantly having to lift 50-pound boxes of various awkwardly shaped vegetable boxes. The concepts aren't difficult. Keep the product full and appealing and don't forget to rotate. Then things begin to change. Corporate is tightening the labor budget because sales aren't where they want them. Labor is getting tighter and tighter each week. Naturally, as labor declines, we can't get stock out fast enough, or we run out of time to order sufficiently and sales dip. Round and round it goes. After a while, we go from having a manager, full opener, a mid-shift, between 4 and 8 hours depending on time of the month, sometimes a second half shift, usually a rookie or someone from a different department to help out, and a full closer, 28 to 36 labor hours per day, to having a manager and 2 full closers, 24 labor hours per day, every day, no matter how busy or slow. On top of that, the manager doesn't touch much of the product because they come in early in the morning, and when we leave for the night, everything has to be full. Now, this makes very little sense to me because that means all the fresh product sits out all night, some is refrigerated and watered. So we have to pull things like strawberries that are extremely perishable, just for her, the manager, to put them back out in the morning. This is a big warehouse-type store that is infamous for its great produce quality. Not Costco or Sam's Club big, but same idea. As time goes on, we fall more and more behind. We are struggling to keep up. Now she is irate because things are not as full as they used to be. "You can't leave until everything is finished," she told us. Every night the displays must be full. The load has to be broken down. We get 6 to 12 pallets of fresh product daily. The back room has to be swept, all the product in the back room condensed, and any extra cleaning or other duties she's assigned that day. Oh, and she loads up all the 6-wheelers we use to bring out product with stuff we don't need, because she never leaves the back room before we get there. So we start out behind. Months of this, I'm racking up so much overtime it's not funny. I'm talking an average of 1 or 2 hours OT per day, 5 days a week. Same for my partner. We almost always work side by side, shift-wise, not literally. But he makes more, and they don't like how expensive he is. The only bright side for me is my partner has seniority by about 15 years, so she blames him for everything. However, she won't tell me directly if I'm doing anything wrong. She'll leave a nasty note for me to find later before she leaves for the day, but that's it. Any sane person would realize that it is not possible to do by ourselves. Doesn't matter. The day after we both put in 11-hour shifts, she scolds us on how could the two of us have put in 22 hours combined and still not get everything done. We explain everything we had to do, but it falls on deaf ears, and I'm starting to become checked out mentally, so she tells us, "You have to leave on time." So every night we're faced with a choice: do we stay and actually finish, or do we leave on time? Doesn't matter, we can't win. If we leave on time, we didn't get everything done. A couple times the supervisor, her boss, came in and saw things not full and she got in trouble. But if we stay, that's overtime, and we all know how triggering that is to management. Eventually, I'm expecting my first kid, so I get a second job that complements this one in industry and allows me to service 24-hour locations, meaning I can do it immediately after my shift ends, or after a power nap in the car. I'm pretty exhausted and losing patience after a few more months of this. Backroom produce coolers are awesome places to vent and cool off, by the way. But as I said in my long post, I love a challenge. Careful what you wish for. The results. Eventually, we get a new store manager. While this didn't improve corporate policy, this guy turns out to be the best manager the company had ever seen. Literally won Manager of the Year and got promoted to District Supervisor. He fights corporate on their labor policy and proves that the store is more profitable when he spends more labor to make it more appealing and offers superior customer service. The produce manager got forced to transfer stores because my partner had complained to the union about her unreasonable demands and targeting him with harassment since she always blamed him. He's also Mexican legal, in case you were wondering, and over 40, so 2 legally protected classes. Years later, I was visiting her new store on a training assignment, and she had also been demoted to customer service, holy irony, where I believe she still is today. Once my kid is born, the new store manager let me take my pay time off, and we all lived happily ever after. Almost. I did get promoted in the customer service department a few months later, but that only led to more stories for another day. 2. I used to work at a drive-up storage facility. We had pretty cheap prices and a few deals, so we got 3 types of people renting. Normal people, business people, homeless/jobless people who try to live out of the storage units and stay in the facility most of the day, rearranging their storage unit, so they had an excuse to stay. Now our story begins with the normal people, unfortunately. Most normal people are normal, as you would think. They're moving, need a place to store stuff. Most of the time they aren't happy with moving, and that makes sense. I try to be patient and kind. One facility rule the owners had me enforce was that we need to kick everyone out of the facility at 8 sharp. No exceptions. The office closes before then, and my job was to drive back at 8 every night and check the whole facility. By the way, I'm not on the clock for time. I'm supposed to just do a security check. Enter a family with an older lady and her daughter renting a unit. They were easy to work with. I respect elders a lot, so I usually try to be extra friendly to older people. Move-in day. They had a big old truck full of stuff. It looked like a lot of stuff was going to be stacked in the unit. Of course, when I come back later that night, they're still there unloading stuff. They had a bunch of guys helping them. I drive up and remind them of the rules. They must be out by 8.
But we're almost done. We can get more in. Just need a few minutes.
With previous experience, I knew how this was going to go. I repeated the rules and told them they also signed a contract that they'd obey these rules. But I said I'd check the rest of the facility first so they could wrap up. They said thank you. I finish and drive to the front, and of course, they aren't there. I get out of my car and walk over to them. And they're still going strong unloading. So I decide to pressure a little and walk over and let them know once the facility is closed. I stand next to them for 30 minutes. They finally decide they aren't going to finish tonight and pack up. 50 minutes after the facility closed, and I let them out of the locked gate and went home at 9. Now, my boss caught wind of this. My boss was a real stickler for rules and stuff. He kinda had a notion that people would follow contract rules if they were enforced. But I knew people would just push our limits. My boss told me that we needed to keep the gate locked after closing time, and we can't have people staying late. I didn't want to stay that late either. The next day, they came back late. They got there as the office was closing in the evening to continue unloading. I really hoped they got the message the first time, but lo and behold, when I came for the security check, they were unloading what seemed to be a new load. I wasn't as patient with them this time. I wasn't rude, but I was definitely being more blunt with how I talked to them. I let them know they needed to leave immediately.
Okay, we're just finishing up.
I'd heard that one before. This time I circled the unit block they were at, and every time I passed them I let them know I was done with the rest of the facility. They seemed to get the picture, but the clock was still ticking, and by the time they closed the unit, and I tailgated their truck out of there, it had already been another 40 minutes past. I was tired of getting lectured by my boss on how we needed to enforce these rules. For some reason he had a mindset that I was letting them stay and being nice. No. The first time I was nice, but I wasn't letting them stay, and I can't physically force these people out. MC time, baby. The third day they were finishing the unloading. While on site, I saw them and went up to them and just gave them a pass-by reminder that they need to wrap up before 8. Later that night, I check and yep, they're still there. I'm getting a bit peeved at this point, so I check the facility quickly, then I decide to drive out. The front gate has a code lock that denies codes after 8:10. Yeah, there was even a grace period. Since they had me let them out every time, they didn't know their code wouldn't work. At least since they didn't seem to know the rules, they definitely didn't read that in bold highlighted in our contract. So as per my boss's order, I left the gate locked and left. I live close by, so I went home, got a snack, watched a couple of shows, then about 9:40 went back to the facility to find them stuck at the gate. They were not happy, but as I let them out, I said to them, "The facility closes at 8 sharp and this gate locks. We aren't always around to let you out, and that's why we post the close times everywhere." A lie, since I checked it every day, but I didn't want them to think they could get away with it anymore. They just angrily left, but I didn't have a problem with them again. I do feel bad for that older lady, but I don't know, they just weren't listening. 3. My company has supervisors fill in for management roles in busy periods. As work experience and cost saving, I guess. We get paid more when we do it, and it does lead to permanent promotions. I'd been at the company 8 years and had fallen into the rhythm of being a supervisor 8 months and a manager for the 4 busier months of the year. For my own personality reasons, I'm a little unprofessional, you may see instances of that below, I hadn't passed the interview for a permanent manager yet, but in terms of experience I had more than most of the actual managers. I just stepped down from a department manager role after a busy period in the defect management department, and I was resigned as a team supervisor for the largest department in headcount. I was bored AF. The supervisors were expected to do some real easy paperwork and be visible to the staff around the shop floor. I reached out to my regional manager Anna, my boss's boss's boss, who I'd worked closely in the last role. I knew she was having issues with my old department and was trying to get in on a better role, not a promotion, just something more interesting, maybe working under the dude doing my old job. I complained to her that I do as much work in 10 hours in my current role as I used to do in the first 45 minutes in the last one. And it gave me a small project to do. It was a little Excel work that leveraged what I knew from running the defect work. It was an hour's work top, so I completed it that day with no issues. My little project highlighted a place where we could make a lot of gains in defect reduction. So Anna sent me an email asking me to increase the scope of the project, and I, politely, pointed out that she should have sent that to my manager James, as it was beyond a small chat and would allocate a fair amount of my time every day. James was a nice enough person, but he was inexperienced and didn't know when or how to be tough, and he was already getting pissed off that I had more experience and more project work than him. He tore me out. Don't disrespect Anna over email. When I was trying to have his back and keep him in chain. To me, this was pathetic. Keeping him in loop was an act of respect, and he was basically admitting he didn't have the backbone to question requests from Anna. A few weeks later, new project is showing improvement. James has seen the emails and his bosses mentioned it in meetings, and he starts getting on my case about the amount of time I'm spending on project work versus supervisor work in his department. I asked him if he had actually any proof I wasn't doing my job and to show me a metric where I was doing less than another person. This job was way too easy and overstaffed with 4 other supervisors. And I know recordably I did more than the others as we were supposed to log every interaction we have with staff, which I did meticulously, and the others saw as a box-ticking exercise. So he couldn't prove I was neglecting the job, because the job was frankly too easy to neglect. The job was walk around, say hi to people, and tell them if they made a mistake. I truly believe a golden retriever could do most of it. He asked me to write a detailed breakdown of how I split my day, how many hours I spent on my project work versus department work. I found it funny, as he was obviously asking me to tie my own noose. But I know the company better than him, so I did so, comparing the detailed reports on coaching the staff interactions I submitted versus the spoke to X reports the other supervisors were doing. I detailed how I was using 6 out of 10 hours a day to easily do twice the work of his other supervisors combined, and then spent the other 4 hours on the defect project. I even showed how the staff I spoke to had provable improvements in productivity, where the staff the other supervisors spoke to weren't even on site some of the times they claimed they spoke to them. I then emailed it to James, CC'd Anna, with the breakdown of the improvements my defect project had shown at the same time. Anna called me in the next day. She had a meeting with James, who had asked that I not work on projects for another department. He had presented an edited version of my report which didn't include the comparisons and edits, just the 6 hours department, 4 hours project split. Anna, who had read the whole report, told me she laughed in his face and agreed with him, quoting, "You are right. He's spending way too much time as a supervisor. The project work is more important." She then informed me I was being reassigned as a process manager 2 levels above my current job, where I eventually got the job permanently as my people skills didn't matter in a department with no staff. Some of my project outcomes were rolled out to the network and saved a lot of money, so that's all I do now. My project split is 7 hours Reddit and YouTube and 3 hours actual work, but I make enough savings to justify my existence. And since I'd been forced to write a detailed report of all the work I was actually doing as a supervisor, it was enough to prove he didn't need as many as he had, and they didn't backfill me. They later reassigned another 2 and started asking for proof they were actually speaking to people. 4. So this happened my second semester dorming at my college campus. I had met my roommate at orientation. I could kind of already tell she was going to be a pain in my ass. And I was right about that. I had planned on moving rooms to be closer to some friends the next semester, but let me get to the story that led to my revenge. On our campus, you had to pay for meals using your student ID, which had a certain amount of money on it each semester. You could also use an app that you put your name and ID info into, and it makes it easier to pay, but the name and ID must match for it to work. Any funds from the fall semester would roll over into the spring, but then at the end of spring it would just expire. Because of this, and because I only ate once or twice a day, I had a ton saved up in my card. My roommate, on the other hand, did not, so I offered to pay for some of her meals from time to time, in trade of her picking up the food for us, which involved her using my card twice in person and then she'd return it. Then one day I noticed on my app that my card was being charged even when I was not ordering food. And not just like a meal for several people. This meant that whoever was ordering, I wonder who, either had to have stolen my ID card, which I had in my pocket when I got the charge, or was impersonating my info in the app, which are both big no-nos on my campus. I was quick to put 2 and 2 together and was pretty pissed. I was initially going to confront her on it, but decided to formulate a plan instead. That day I went and ordered a second ID card for $25 to use for later, as it took a couple of weeks to get the new one. I let her charge several things to my card over a good 2 weeks for her and her friends, and she wasn't very good at hiding it either, and they would come to our dorm and eat. Well, I just screenshot and sent emails to the support team of the app about the charges, knowing nothing would get done until I contacted someone in person. And one day it got even better, as you can buy groceries with the card off campus as well. She decided to pay for alcohol with my card, which doesn't get pinged as an issue on my card due to me being over 21, but she was only 19. Not sure how she got it, but it was just the thing to finally act on my plan. I put my best sad face on and contacted the head of campus living and head of my dorm about the charges on my account. I dropped some hints that it could be my roommate, and I mentioned I got a new ID and asked what I should do. I was told to order a new card, and once I got it, to deactivate my current ID and use a new one for purchases now, making my old ID have a balance of $0 and also to ping if someone uses it to buy anything. They also told me they would be visiting my dorm to discuss the issue with my roommate. I accepted that and waited. They sent the confirmation email that they would be visiting, and I just decided to add more fuel to the fire. My roommate was groaning about not having the funds for food in front of me in our dorm. I told her I really couldn't help her as I was running low on funds, and she just kind of laughed it off and left the room to probably go use my old ID. I deactivated my first card right after she left, and surprise, surprise, she used my info to pay. Except when she tried to pay for her and her friends this time, it was declined and it pinged that my ID was used. Campus security was called and she was escorted back to our dorm. Pretty much perfect timing for our meeting with campus living. She was scared shitless when they came to the dorm to talk and look through her stuff. On her phone, still logged into the app, was my ID information and name. And in her dorm closet was a half-full bottle of cheap vodka. And on my phone was a screenshot of said unauthorized vodka purchase. In the end, she was forced to pay me back all the funds she used in cash, reported for underage drinking, which automatically suspends you from campus living for at least a year, and would have on her record that she performed identity theft. which I also could have her charged for out of school. In the end, I got to have my own dorm for the remainder of that semester, and even part of the semester after, because it wasn't put as an available room for new dormers. I did get all my money back from her parents, who were so embarrassed and apologized profusely. And when she did eventually come back to campus, no one wanted to dorm with her because they knew she had stolen her roommate's ID. I think in the end she rented off campus. 5. So I had been working at a local pizzeria for a few months. At first I loved working there. The manager, the shift manager, and the local boss were amazing people, and were not only very welcoming, but very understanding of the few issues I have that make certain parts of the job harder to do. Originally, I was hired to become assistant manager of the local boss, helping out with the administrative and financial side of the business. I did some improvements on their Excel and helped organize and optimize the computer. Then I was placed in a smaller location of theirs, which is closer to where I live, and put to work as main cashier and phone person. I still did assistant manager duties, but this time from my phone using file sharing with the boss. I had no issues with this, as the boss himself helps out inside the stores regularly too, and the manager of that location was pretty chill as well. All went well. I had some interesting experiences there. Eventually, the true nature of my boss and manager started showing, when at first they started making me do tasks that they know were too hard on my physical issues. I warned them that I was born with a weak spine and underdeveloped ankles, but they still suddenly started making me grab boxes with spare bottles of drink, 5 to 10 liters in a box from the basement, which has a very dangerous staircase. I almost fell down those stairs more than once. My assistant manager achievements started to be ignored and my advice, PR-related advice, cast aside. More and more did I start to notice some minor health code violations and decided to look into it. Then the big kicker came in. I fell sick with a very bad stomach flu. As most of you might know, a stomach flu is very contagious. My doctor prescribed me to stay home for 3 days. I sent my boss, manager, and shift manager a picture of said prescription, and immediately all 3 started to message me and call me to tell me I have to go to work anyway. They used my financial instability to manipulate me, as they don't give paid sick leave. I ended up going to work after all, and the stomach flu ended up lasting for 6 days instead of 3, due to the lack of rest I got. I can only hope I didn't get anyone else sick. Then the COVID outbreak started. Oh my, that was a storm. I got very ill, had all the symptoms of COVID for a few days already, when I finally contacted my doctor, who put me on a week quarantine. I had a note stating that this whole week I was not even allowed to leave the building of my studio, and was in no way allowed to come in contact with other people. Still, I got messages and phone calls trying to guilt trip and manipulate me into going to work. What I turned out to have was a very bad flu, combined with allergic reactions to some of the bad conditions in my building that the landlord ignores, and a nervous breakdown in my body, caused by stress, seeing as how my job paid just barely enough to survive. After I returned back to work, I found out that someone else had been hired for the assistant manager duties without me being told. I found out by noticing my work was being done by someone else, someone who didn't care about the store PR at all. My manager started to make me do tasks that were even worse on my bad back, and I had gotten on extreme overtime that gets paid out of record, which makes me unable to see if it's even paid out properly. This resulted in a complete shutdown of my body from the stress, and one day, about a month after my quarantine, I suddenly could not stand up for more than 5 minutes before I would nearly faint. My doctor wrote me 2 days of pure rest. You can guess what my boss and manager did. Not only did they try to manipulate me into going to work after all, the boss even told me I go to work when I have a headache, upon which I told him straight up, a headache is not going to cause you to faint after 5 minutes of standing at the cash register, and maybe hit your head on one of the many unprotected edges of the work table, or worse. After my reply, he told me I was being overdramatic, and even accused me of going to my doctor just to get notes to stay home. I don't pay you to stay home! You don't pay sick leave at all, so why are you complaining? Then he put down the phone call. That was it for me. That is when I decided to start putting my foot down. I contacted my doctor and had her put together a document stating all my medical issues, and the fact that as a risk patient I was not allowed to work until my boss could provide the necessary protection. I sent my boss a formal email with said document and a link to where he could find the actual law about this. My boss did not provide any protection, no masks, no gloves, bad soap, no sanitizer, or anything like that. The mandatory distance between employees was not enforced either. My boss replied on his mail telling me that if I want a mask or gloves, I should just bring my own. We had quite a conversation through the mail. I kept myself professional and calm, while my boss started to get more and more accusatory. One thing I noticed since the first mail is that he didn't write any of them himself, considering that I know he does not speak Dutch that well, yet to make such complex sentencing. And when I still worked in his office, he had me type out mails for him too. But unlike what I did, the person typing his mails now didn't mention this at the bottom of the mails, which is mandatory. So eventually I told my boss that I quit. I was going to turn in my uniform and not come back to work any longer. Despite having resigned, my boss wrote me up as no call, no show for the rest of the month. Luckily, I still had my doctor's document to prove to the financial support organization that this was not true, or I would be refused part of the support I have now. Now here is where my revenge comes into play. As I said before, I looked into health code violations of the stores, and I had managed to document quite a few things. The lack of proper hygiene materials, the fact that spare non-refrigerated food was stored right with the cleaning supplies, the fact that they would thin out cleaning supplies like crazy to cut costs, etc., etc. I also kept proof of some of their unethical practices, like the fact that they paid overtime off the record, and thus undermining tax and making it impossible for employees to see if their overtime is paid out correctly. I also had a few colleagues who quit their jobs around the same time give written statements with their concerns about the practices, etc. I put all of this together in a neat little folder, which I uploaded to multiple agencies, and mailed to some people that helped me get it to the needed attention. I am not usually the type to just tell on people, but this was a matter of protecting people. The customers being exposed to pizzas that will most likely make them sick, the employees probably being used for more hours for less pay, and other things. After this, I also made sure to tell my friends and family at least about the bad hygiene practices, and warn them not to eat at the local brand with 3 stores in the city. I know some of you might say this won't do much to them, but that is where I have one last surprise. When I still worked as the assistant manager, I had access to the complaint site and the financial documents. I have seen how they run and how the business goes, and I have noticed that not only do they have bad PR, their profit is going down, mostly due to the bad PR I mentioned. The boss and managers don't care what people think and don't care about keeping customers happy, which is making people less likely to come back. The overall curve was going down, and the biggest complaints they get is from people getting sick from the pizzas, allergy notices being ignored, and more. These complaints were getting ignored, and some of them even got very rude responses. I tried telling them to be more customer-friendly, but they don't. So I don't need to spread the word for them to lose business. But I might have sped it up at least a little. Last I heard from the last colleague who quit is that the store got a surprise health code inspection recently, and those turned out not too well. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, number 49. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use and sent in stories for use in this video. Nearly there, one video to record. Don't quite have all the stories for it, but I think I'll be able to... I'll get it sorted, it should be fine. It's spinning plays. It's because I'm recording so far in advance. Getting the stories earlier, proving a little bit of a challenge, but I think I'll get there. So far, not too bad noise-wise. A little bit of barking in the background and farting. Well, it could be lawn mowing, really, I suppose, when I think about it. Yeah. But almost there, and then... Well, I'll probably get done just before I go to bed, but then I'll be done. Okay, and with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.